I was in my early 40s, and it became apparent that maybe there were some differences about me. And it was actually somebody very close to me who suggested it. And at first I was like, no way. But then the seed was planted, and very quickly I realized, okay, well, look, there may be something in this. And I went to get a diagnosis, and I was diagnosed with ADHD. And anyone who knows me will know, just look at my desk, it's no surprise. But I was actually also diagnosed with an autistic spectrum disorder. I prefer the word condition, but technically it's a disorder, which came as a huge shock, but helped actually understand a lot of the ways in which I work. I can get very interested in certain topics, as you can probably tell. I can hyper focus on a piece of work. I'm not always, and unusually for a recruiter, I'm not always the best in social situations. Not naturally. I've had to learn a lot of those skills.
Yes.
Everyone assumes recruiters are just these gregarious, big personalities, and many people are. But not everybody.
For sure.
In fact, some of the best recruiters I've ever worked with or seen in my life are incredibly, they're very organized and structured, but not necessarily gregarious, not necessarily charisma. So anyway, I and it really helped me to understand a lot more about myself. And I recognized that I was a bit different, and I was really lucky. I feel very, very blessed that I was able to start my own business and make it succeed. Because, to be honest with you, I wasn't the best employee. And I look back now knowing I wasn't the best employee.
And that makes sense. Some of the things add up.
Hugely now.
Yeah.
And it's actually not unusual for a lot of people with neurodivergent conditions to start their own businesses because they build the structures around them that work for them.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily fit into I was not great with timekeeping. Everyone else is wearing a suit. I'd wear like a suit and shirt and then a pair of jeans to work. I was a pretty good recruiter, so I got away with it, right? But
So let me reflect, if I may, just reflect,
sure,
because this is resonating strongly for me. You said that you got some feedback from someone who knew you that, hey, have you considered this? And then you got a diagnosis. I'm curious about that process because, well, first of all, I know that a lot of our listeners and some of our clients definitely are diagnosed with ADHD. So I think people will resonate with this. But I think I come from quite a neurodivergent family. And you mentioned autistic spectrum. I think my dad and his family, like his brothers, like my grandfather, but they didn't have this term. They were considered eccentric, right? They were quite odd, but they were smart, and they were in professions where it was kind of fine. Like, my dad's a psychiatrist. His dad was a doctor. His brother was a professor. And you can kind of get away with being a bit odd, right? And it's almost a stereotype, right? Like the mad professor or whatever. But looking back, I think, and I know there are people who've been diagnosed with autism in my family. So I'm now looking at myself. I'm 50, coming up for 52. I'm wondering, maybe some of my behaviors and it is a spectrum, right? So I guess it's a question of where you fall on that spectrum and whether it's materially affecting your life, your relationships, and so on. But what was your kind of process of discovery?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It is a spectrum. Some people like a label, and some people don't want to be defined by a label.
Yeah.
For me, it helped me understand myself, and I think that was why it was important. And you can be absolutely successful and have in recruitment, you're talking about, eccentric or memorable. That's important.
Yeah.
Being memorable in recruitment is can you do the job? In fact, my mother told me that. Can you do the job, and are you memorable? They're the two most important things. And she was absolutely right. So I think, somebody did mention it to me, and I was a bit like, okay, that's a bit strange. And I felt I was actually quite defensive at first. Looking back now, it is a family trait. These are inherited conditions.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, you can actually, and I'm not an expert, so, but you, there is some physiological changes to the brain where you can actually spot very subtle changes. But yeah, so, and I knowing now, I look back at some of my family, I recognize that in my own father, for example, and I see it in my children as well. So for me, it was an opportunity to learn more about myself at a time where I thought there were some questions. I think I've got this wrong sometimes, so any listener can check this out. But I was told it was Freud, but I've never been able to find this quote. But I heard this quote and I thought it was great. We pay rent on our anxieties, and the rent keeps going up. And what that means is, as we get older, it's harder and harder to kind of mask some of these traits that we learn. I learn unknowingly how to behave in a way.
Yes.
How to behave in a sales environment.
Yeah.
I learned. It didn't come naturally. But the cost of doing that goes up and up and up. It's tiring, masking.
Right.
And I was at a point in my life where I was like, okay, there's an opportunity to learn. And if I can lean more into me, then maybe that's going to be a good thing. I'm curious and going through the process. And it's a difficult process. In the UK, it's a really difficult process to get a diagnosis. If we have the National Health Service here, it's almost impossible to get a diagnosis.
So did you go private to go through that?
Yeah. And I'm very lucky to be able to do that and afford to do that. And I get that. So that was and then I suppose I knew ADHD that was really high. I was really likely to, just given what I'd learned. But the autism, I think, actually was a bit of a surprise, maybe because I just hadn't opened my eyes to it. But it's allowed me to be successful in my career. It's actually helped me, I think, because it's allowed me to be interested in certain and really focusing on those topics.